Who knows if someone left halfway through? Like, stuff this, I'm not coming back for the second session. Cool. So I'm going to sit on a stool for this one because it's going to be a little bit more practical. And I've termed this building a revolution. Mainly just because I like the idea of a revolution, and I've always wanted to be a part of one, but never really had a reason because I've lived in Australia and I'm very blessed growing up. So what I'm hoping to do here is, if the first session was all about the heart of the leader, if you wanted to keep it thematic because you're taking notes, you could call this on the skills of a leader. You could call it building a revolution. You could also call it about to go to sleep and have a nap time. I'm not sure. Whatever you feel applies to you, that'd be great. I'm going to be a bit more informal in this one, a little bit faster pace, a bunch of content, and hopefully at the end we'll step into some workshops. Why am I talking about building a revolution? I took over our youth ministry back in 2012, and I had these grand visions of starting a youth ministry and it bringing revival to Australia. Like, I don't know if you've ever had this idea that what you're about to do is going to be the answer from God to the world. And if that's the case, you have ever felt that, you'll know how wrong you were about that being something that you should hope for. So I was really excited. I thought, God was going to transform the face of the planet because I was now a youth pastor, and I got really, really pumped. And we started to run massive youth events. So one of our youth events, we would run one where we had, I think, something like 14,000 water bombs and like 250 kids rocked up. And you can imagine if you let 250 kids loose on 14,000 water bombs. It was like a work health and safety issue, but it was so much fun. Like, my competitive side came out again. I made a bunch of kids cry because I think we froze some of the water bombs. I'm not quite sure what we did, but it was brutal. And then what ended up happening was I remember sitting there after youth one night. We had about 30 leaders. And we were just kind of sitting there, and I looked at my team, and they looked dead. Like, my wife was part of the team back then. Were you part of the team back then? Did you do the water bomb fights with us? Some? Okay. So I just looked at the team, and they all just looked at me like, this was horrible. Like, we had 250 kids, but the leaders looked at me, and they're like, we don't want to do this again. Like, this was a really hard night for us. And so I had to start asking myself, well, what are we doing? What's the point of what we're doing? And I went to the Bible because I wanted to learn about, I thought kids were leaving church because church wasn't fun, because church wasn't entertaining, because church didn't have enough fireworks and kids playing messy games. And then I started to kind of tried to understand what we meant by the word church. And this is critical. Because the first time Jesus says church, it's in response to Peter, when Peter says, you are the Messiah, you are the Son of the living God. And Jesus says to Peter this, he says, upon this rock I will build my church. He says, truly I tell you, you are Simon, son of whoever, and upon this rock I will build my church. And what's he saying there? He's saying, upon the declaration of Jesus being the Son of God, I will build my church. And that's the first time in the Bible we see the word church. But he doesn't actually say church. He says in Greek this word ecclesia. And the word ecclesia is actually a word that wasn't used for a building. It wasn't used for a service. They would give the word ecclesia to a group of people who were called out for a purpose. So it was like if you were protesting, the government was cutting down the forest, you would form an ecclesia and they would stand for something together. Does that make sense? And so what ended up happening is that Jesus almost started to saying, upon this rock, I will build my revolution. And we took that and we made it between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. on a Sunday morning. We made it 3 songs, a tithes and offerings message, a sermon, and tea and coffee and stale biscuits down the back. And it's like, we wondered why kids were leaving the church. And it's like, actually, I know exactly why kids are leaving the church. It's because what we have made the church was never what Jesus wanted it to be. Is a church building important? Yes. Is a church service important? Yes. Hebrews says this, do not give up meeting together weekly with the saints. However, the church is something more than that. The church was meant to be a movement of people. It was meant to be a movement of people, not a building and a location. And so my question I have to ask you is, if you're leading young people, how are you teaching them that what they're doing is not attending a service, but joining a movement? Of living lives that are called out for something grander than themselves. And this kind of starts by asking a couple questions. When you're a leader and you start forming something, you need to make sure you start with why. Now, every great company in the world has a great why. Now, just for a sec, you might be like, Michael, we're in church, we're not in business. Like, why are we talking about whys? Does anyone know what McDonald's why is? McDonald's why is literally to create a fun and friendly family food restaurant. Okay? Now, that's not why you go to McDonald's all the time. You go there for an easy feed, right? But that's their why. Nike's why is something like this. Inspiring athletes to greatness. That's their why. Now, if you said, what does Nike do? We all know. They started off making shoes. My man down the back's wearing a Nike hoodie. They make hoodies. They sponsor Kevin Hart, apparently. They do a bunch of those things, but that's not why they do it. Why do they do it? They want to inspire athletes to greatness. Now, I'm going to get this one wrong, but if you actually went to Apple and you said, hey, Apple, why do you do what you do? Does anyone know what their vision statement is? What's your tag? Because I think it's changed since I put this together. Yeah, right. So the Think Differently one, that was a big one. But there was this understanding of simplicity in the early days, right? They wanted to make technology simple. But if you ask what Apple did, what do? They run a music program. They release headphones. They do computer software. They're now in the market of redefining how we consume by their Apple stores. All this stuff. That's what they do. But they always return back to their why. And here's the thing. When you start with what do you do? Well, we run a youth program. That's actually that's putting the cart before the horse. You've got to start with why. Then, once you've got your why, you can get to what. What are you going to do? Okay, so why do you exist? Why do you breathe? Why are you here? Why does this Taiwanese church exist on this plot of land in this part of Brisbane? Why is it here? Why did you put a church here? Now, what do you do? Well, we meet here on Sundays. Is that all you do? But your what has to come from your why. And only after you've got your what can you move on to how. The most crucial part of this is your why. Do you know why you're a youth leader? Do you know why you're a young adult leader? Do you know why you follow Jesus? You know the reason why people stop reading their Bibles? It's because they haven't forgotten what to do. They've forgotten why they do it. You know, half the reason why people stop coming to church isn't because they've forgotten what they should do. It's because they've forgotten why they should do it. Now, the why is critical because your why will carry you through hard seasons. Your why will carry you through. So when we're looking at why, what's the next step? Well, for me, when I was developing our youth ministry, what God really seized my heart with was understanding that I really felt like the older generations look down on the younger generations. Like they look at teenagers and they're like, when you get to 18, you're a serious Christian, but you can't be a serious Christian if you're 12. You can't be a serious Christian if you're 13. You can't really get to know Jesus real well until you can drive a car. And I just disagreed with that because Paul wrote to Timothy this great youth ministry line that everyone's probably used at some stage in some form of a sermon. 1 Timothy 4 verse 12, don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. And what this was, is this gave me a better why. Now, when I was a youth pastor, I thought that what this originally meant was don't let anyone look down on you because you're young, stick the finger to the man and show the old people how it's done, and you're better than them, and all this stuff. But what this is actually saying is the older generations should be looking at the younger generations, not in anger, not in angst, but in being inspired by them. We should be leading youth ministries that have teenagers in them that, 60-year-olds are going, I want faith like that. I want passion like that. I want to believe like that again. Now, I think we can work both ways. Do I think our younger generation should be looking up? 100%. 100%. Our older generation should be inspiring our younger, but our younger generation should be inspiring our older. We wrote something for Synod a little while ago, a spoken word, and it used this line, what could we do with the wisdom of the old and the passion of the young? And for me, this became the heart. When I developed a why for our youth ministry, our why was this. New Life Youth exists to become a revolution of young people passionate about Jesus and his power to change the world. And we would tag it like this. We would say, we exist by Jesus, for Jesus. And then we would just give the kids a why. Why do you rock up to youth? We're part of a revolution. By Jesus, for Jesus. Every single one of them. We would just talk to them about it. Why do you come? We're part of a revolution. You say to young people that they're a part of a revolution, suddenly they start to rock up a little bit more because young people love to rebel, right? We just need to teach them to rebel against the right things. Rebel against lust. Rebel against darkness. Rebel against pride. Rebel against selfishness. Like they just rebel because that's in their nature, but we just need to teach them to rebel in the right direction. And so when we start to tell young people, hey, we're a revolution, they're like, yeah, mom and dad, I'm a revolution. And they're like treating their mom and dad with respect. And they're like, this is a great revolution. You should go be a part of it. That's awesome. You should take over the world. And there was this understanding. So we just rock up. Every time we communicate to our young people, we'd say, this is our why. This is our why. This is our why. And we put, I'm going to use a very unchristian word here, and I understand, I'll say it. We put sexy language around it to make it attractive, to help communicate their culture. Like, there is, you being in Australia, being in a Taiwanese church, you would understand the complexities of communicating between cultures. But we think that the only cultures that exist is racial cultures. There's demographic cultures, there's age cultures, there's bridges. The reason why when I was a youth pastor, I would listen to the top 40 every week was not because I like Ariana Grande. It was because I wanted to hear what they were saying. I wanted to hear the language, so I knew how to talk their language, but redeem it for the sake of the gospel. Does that make sense? It's not because I want to be cool. It's because I want to step into their world to show them how Jesus incarnates in their world. So when I say revolution by Jesus, for Jesus, someone's like, well, where's that in the Bible? It's not necessarily word for word there, but I'm taking the gospel message and making it accessible for young people. So that's our why. That's kind of how we existed. And then when we move to what, and I hope this is going to be helpful, when you're thinking about young people, young adults and youth, you've got to think it through. Ultimately, the reason why I think we do what we do is because we want to see young people discipled. We want to see young people become more and more like Christ. And what are we talking about there? We're talking about spiritual formation. We're talking about taking a young person who knows the answer is Jesus to everything in Sunday school and helping them one day become a leader who knows that there are more complex answers to complex questions than that. We're wanting to disciple them. And so I think we need to be aware that there are different elements to spiritual formation in our lives, but particularly in the lives of young people. Now, I've called them the 3 R's, the R's of relationship, revelation, and revolution. And that's literally just because I wanted 3 R's. You could call them whatever you want, and I'll explain what they are. When you go to different churches do these really well. If you go to a Pentecostal church, they are going to be really good at relationship and revelation. What do I mean by that? You go to a Pentecostal church, they're going to make you feel welcome. They're going to make you feel like if you wear skinny jeans and a deep V, that you're a part of it. And they're really good at just like epic spiritual moments, right? Like you go to a Hillsong conference and suddenly it's like, oh my gosh, we've got glitter falling from the ceiling. This is amazing. The Holy Spirit's present. Like there's this sense where they make space for God. They're probably more natural at it. Now, here's the thing, is I think that these 3 things are really important for spiritual formation. So where you should start is people need to belong first. So relationship's really important. So when we're talking about spiritual formation, you want to belong. The second thing that I think is really important is at some stage for spiritual formation, kids, people, adults need to experience God. It's got to be more than an idea. You've got to create space for a young person to actually encounter the living person of Jesus Christ. And that's not something you can control. Like you don't get to go, all right, Jesus, and now. Poof. Like that's not how that happens. But we create space. And that can happen through prayer, can happen through worship, and it can happen just through, like Eric was leading us in times before, of just creating space in worship, just pulling back a little. And then the last part of spiritual formation I think is really important is revolution, which is the sending out on mission, Now, the Uniting Church, not this Uniting Church, let's talk generally. I'm part of the Uniting Church, so I'm saying this from experience. It's really good, better than most people at 2 of these. We are excellent at relationship and revolution. You go to any Uniting Church, particularly as a young person, you walk through the doors. Like this is not a stock standard Uniting Church, but if you go to any other Uniting Church as a young person, they are going to welcome you well because they might not have seen a young person in a couple of years. They're going to make sure that you feel welcome. They're going to make sure you feel like you belong. They're going to give you a stale cookie and be like, oh my goodness, do you want to be our pastor? This is going to be great. Like they're going to make, right? They do that well. Now, what else are we great at the Uniting Church? Social justice. Like we lead, I think, most Christian denominations in this, and we should be proud of that. That's great. We stand up for refugees. We stand up for the poor. We stand up for the last and the least of these. It's so good. Where I think we fall short in the Uniting Church is revelation. Creating space for the uncontrollable presence of the Spirit of God to do what only the Spirit of God can do. I love liturgy. I was an Anglican chaplain for a while. So when I say this next part, I'm not saying liturgy is wrong. But sometimes when our services or our moments are so controlled and contrived, we wonder where the Spirit of God is, and we've actually programmed him out of the room. And that's really critical. And so I'm thinking about how to do a youth ministry, a youth program, but even as I'm starting to step into church planning, and I'm thinking about this, what's important for me is the first step is this: how we make people feel like they belong. How do we make people feel like they belong? If a young person, a young adult, or anyone, whatever age, walks through those doors and they do not immediately feel safe, they do not immediately feel like they're welcome, then they will not come back. For this reason, I was never allowed to be on the welcome gate as a youth pastor because I freaked kids out. I'd be like, what's up? And like you get this introverted kid who's like, oh. It's like I had youth kids that would warn their friends about me and be like, hey, my youth pastor's weird. First time you meet him. Second time you meet him, still weird. Third time, still weird, but you get used to it. So don't worry about it. So like it was like Michael wait in the auditorium, don't freak out kids, and then they can come in and hopefully they'll like you by the end of the sermon. But we always put our best people who are great at loving, on the door, on the welcome gate. When we're running life groups, when we're doing anything, pancakes in schools, it's like make people feel welcome, make people feel like they belong. And that means that I've got to be outward focused, right? I've got to be a servant leader. Relationships hugely important. But here's the thing, is that if all you do is the first week they walk in, you make someone feel welcome, you've got to actually do that for the next 3 months. Because some churches are great at you making you feel welcome if you're a visitor, but then if you stick around, they're not great at helping you access their cliques. Does that make sense what I'm saying there? Do you guys have cliques in this church? No? You're Holy Spirit led, whatever, it's fine. But every church has them, right? This is my experience. If you're sitting there going, no, our church doesn't have clique, you're in a clique. All right? You just don't see it. If you're sitting here going, our church has cliques, it's because you're not in a clique and you want to be. Does that make sense? How do people access your social group well? Because if someone comes to a church, it's easy to make them feel like they belong as a visitor. 4 weeks later, if they don't feel like they've got a group of friends, after 3 months, they're going to go find another church. It's not just about the first week. It's about how do they access your social structure well. And that's just basic human instinct. The second part is revelation. How are you creating moments? I know that I was meant to be speaking at the Arise camp, initially, and I'm still honored that I could be a part of this. But the reason why youth camps are excellent is because they actually create space where kids can have, that final night breakdown down the front where it's like, oh my gosh, I'm tired, my hair stinks, and the Holy Spirit is moving. It's amazing. But we can do that every time we gather together. And I don't think that for God to move, it needs to be amazing. Some of the most considerate, some of the most impactful times in my relationship with God has been this, just quiet whispers of His Holy Spirit through His Word. I'm not talking about, hey, you've got to have life-changing, doves flying everywhere. It's just creating space and silence sometimes. I guarantee you now, if we just paused for a minute and I said, hey, God, speak to us. A lot of you would be reminded of things God's been saying to you for a time now that you've been ignoring. It just would happen because God is faithful and God speaks. And sometimes we don't hear His voice because we haven't allowed time to learn how to hear His voice. And the final part is revolution. If someone's going to be a part of what you're doing, how are you empowering them to go out into the world? We need to stop thinking that people need to be inviting people to church. We should be taking Jesus to people, not bringing people to Jesus. It's not how Jesus worked. Jesus didn't go out and bring people to me. He said, go. Don't come back, just go. Now, I know they're going to come back next Sunday because that's our rhythm, but how good would it be if people weren't coming to this Taiwanese church to meet Jesus, but if people came to this Taiwanese church after meeting Jesus? Because they met Him at work. And that's the kind of thing I think with young people, is I always encourage them, hey, how this week can you be praying for your friends to have a conversation in your school? How can we equip? How can we equip? Now, the reason why I say youth camps are great, because youth camps, at a youth camp, you'll see each of these three things. At some stage, kids will start to belong. Some stage, God's going to, do something amazing. And then finally, you send them back out home, and you'll see all these Instagram and Facebook posts of like, how great is God? I love him. So good. Read my Bible 5 times today. I looked at the book of Leviticus. Never have done that before. That's amazing. Let's go kill some animals. And it's like stuff starts, really playing out. That's a reference to the book of Leviticus in case you've never read that before. You're like, why are we killing animals? It's cool. Go read it. You'll understand. But this cycle is really unsustainable. It works on hype at times, and it can be really dangerous if we just think that all we need is relationship, revelation, and revolution. That's why you see this D in the middle. Because the crux of spiritual formation is discipleship. Now, I've seen people feel like they belong. I've seen people encounter Jesus. I've seen people go out into their world and believe they should serve, and still 6 months later fall away and never come back. And it's because I think God has done what he needed to do. We need to be obedient in what we have been asked to do, which is disciple. Now, if your church is anything like my church and the billions of other churches around the world, you would know this. Discipleship is a great buzzword in Christianity. What does your church value? Oh, we value discipleship. Great. What does that look like? We have an epidemic in our church of people knowing how to spell discipleship but not knowing how to live it out. And we think discipleship is just like a one-on-one catch-up every 6 months and over a Starbucks coffee. How you doing? How you reading your Bible? How's all this happening for you? And I just don't think that's the case. So I'm going to play you a video now that first challenged me about discipleship, and hopefully it'll stimulate something in you. When you guys are ready.
When I was a kid, we used to play this game called Simon Says. All right, most of us have played that, unless you're really young, because there's no app for it. Simon Says is, Simon says, pat your head, so okay, Simon said it. It was a very simple game, but it's so weird how in the church, Jesus says is a totally different game. If Jesus says something, you don't have to do it, you just have to memorize it. You study it, you memorize. You guys, it doesn't make any sense, a lot of the things we do. When he tells us to go out and make disciples, and how many people in our churches are actually making disciples? But they memorized it. When I tell my daughter, hey, Rach, go clean your room. She doesn't come back to me 2 hours later and go, I memorized what you said. You said, Rach, go clean your room. I can say it in Greek. My friends are going to come over and we're going to have a study on what it would look like if I cleaned my room. She knows better than that. And so why do we think we're going to come before the judge one day and quote everything that he said? And talk about how much we know. It's just this black and white stuff. If I just started with Scripture, I'd go, here's what I would do. I would start making disciples.
So what we're going to do now is I'm probably only going to play that video as well, Wendy, so I won't play the next couple. I'm actually going to talk a little bit more. So giving you why, how is, we'll go back to there. If I take you here, this is our how. How does Michael run a youth ministry? Michael runs a youth ministry on these 3 values. How do we build relationship? How do we create moments of revelation? How are we sending kids out in revolution? But the D is what. The D is what practically this looks like. And so what you're going to see is how I did this. This is just a suggestion. I think one of the things, I'm doing my master's in discipleship at the moment, currently starting my dissertation on it, so the next year and a half is going to be so much fun for me. But one thing I'm recognizing is it's not so much knowing the way to disciple, it's just knowing that you need to start taking a step of discipleship. So I'm going to give you the way I would teach a leader how to do discipleship well, and you've probably already got your own structures. And so here's what I want you to do today. I want you to shamelessly steal everything that's helpful and forget everything that's boring, okay? You don't even have to tell anyone. You could take the whole thing I've talked about today and be like, this was my idea, and go share it with others. It's fine. Because the win here is that we have more people discipling. That's the win. And so what does it mean by discipling? If I was to learn how to play soccer, right? Let's go. What's your name? Apple Man down the back? Peter, all right? You're a great singer, Peter. Let's say I said to Peter, hey, Peter, listen, I'm kind of looking, where's the My Computer box on my Apple? Like my PC had a My Computer. I can't find my files, and it's really bizarre. What Peter would do is be like, he might try to say, hey, well, you need to go to this thing called Finder and go there. And I'm like, dude, that's weird. Like, what are you doing? And what would Peter need to do to teach me how to use a Mac? He would sit down with me and go, okay, listen, this is how you use an Apple computer. And he'd walk with me. He'd say, hey, anytime you have questions, you come to me and sit down with me, and I'm going to show you that. And then this is what's going to happen is that I'm going to start looking at Peter. I'm going to, hey, Peter's got an Apple Watch. I might get an Apple Watch. And Peter's like, well, let me show you how to use the Apple Watch. This is how you use the Apple Watch. And it's like, well, Peter's got Apple Home. And I'm like, oh, I love Apple Home. And like, I might be saying things right now. You're like, what's Apple Home? Ask Peter. He will sell you all of these products at some stage later. And what's starting to happen now is I'm starting to say, hey, I like what I'm seeing in Peter. And Peter actually is starting to take time to live with me and show me how to use these things. That's discipleship. This guy named Joshi Charko wants to plant 100,000 churches in India in the next 20 years. Now, I met him once, and he was a catalyst for me. I said, how are you training up church pastors so fast? And he said, well, just discipleship. Well, what does that look like? And he said, well, it's just real simply. If someone wants to be a church planter, they go and they live with one of our current church planters for 6 months. I'm like, oh, so they learn how to read the Bible. And he's like, well, yeah, sure, but it's actually everything else. They just watch how they live. They watch what movies they watch, how they spend their money, how they eat, how they dress, how they talk to their wife and their children. They just live life on life. And they see everything. And I'm like, man, I thought discipleship was sitting down with the Bible and like going, okay, let's read through this verse. What did you get? What did I get? All right, let's talk about how we apply it. I'll see you again next month. Like, I thought that was discipleship. And what I start to realize is how little Jesus actually did that and how many times he was just walking with his disciples. How many times he just looked for teachable moments. Because he was in their world. He was with them. Like, he's walking along, he hears them arguing. He doesn't go, well, I'll wait for our next discipleship catch-up to touch that with Peter. He goes, whoa. Hey, guys, let me tell you about who the greatest in the kingdom is. It's the least of these. It's a teachable moment. How did he get that teachable moment? He was in their world. I'd say to youth leaders, you go into a movie by yourself, take a kid. And then the youth leaders would say this, oh, but I probably wouldn't take him to that movie, right? Like, that's not a very good movie. I'm like, you shouldn't be watching that movie then. Like, if you don't want to tell the kid you go see that movie, why are you watching it? Now, that's different when it's like a 13-year-old as an M15 plus movie. Like, they're not all bad. But, like, there were some movies the leaders were seeing, and they're like, oh, no. Oh, well, we probably wouldn't tell our kids we were watching that. I'm like, you shouldn't be watching it at all then. If I can't actually say to you, this is how I live my life, this is why I make this call, this is the decision I'm making as a Christian, then I shouldn't be doing that. Invite your kid over to watch Netflix. Oh, not the shows I watch on Netflix. Hang on, wait, what? Now I'm a young adult pastor. It's even more critical because I have, 19, 20-year-olds, and I've got to question myself, would I do this? Would I teach another young adult to treat my wife like this? And we talk about it all the time when we have people over. We're like, hey, let's make sure we're uplifting each other when people are here. Let's make sure that we're talking to each other in such a way where people are seeing how a married couple should work. Let's be living. This is discipleship really well. So the first step I'd say, if you want to start discipling someone, then here's the thing. Number one, find someone to first disciple you. Find someone to first disciple you. Step into your world. Become a part of your life. To watch movies with you. To go coffee with you. Go shopping with you. I say to leaders, hey, you going clothes shopping this weekend? They're like, yeah. I'm like, take a kid. And they're like, why? I'm like, well, you know how you were complaining about the short shorts and the midriffs and stuff? That's because no one's ever told them how to shop. Like, they think that's how they find value. Take them with you, and that way, do you wear short shorts and midriff, Samuel? Was that why you're laughing? No, okay, my bad. I'm kidding. Like, I'm not even saying it's bad. I'm not trying to, point out clothing. But you know what I mean? Like, and kids are like, oh, we're so worried about our young girls and the clothes they're wearing. I'm like, no one's showed them how to shop. we're so worried about the slogans on our young men's shirt. Take them with you. Be like, that's not a shirt a man of God wears. Hey, let me show you what a man of God dresses like. This is cool, man. Wear this hat, this kind of thing. We think discipleship's just the Bible. It's life. It's following Jesus in every sphere of our world. And so we started to talk to leaders about this, and we started to see it shift. But then I wanted to create an even more tangible way. So what we did is I created these 4 steps that, like, literally, I'd be able to look at, like, what's your name? Sorry, I scared you, Victoria. Didn't I? Like, what's yours? Can you come up and dance? No, I'm kidding. We're not doing that. So let's say I was discipling Victoria, right? Now, what's the problem is that, a male I would not disciple you because you were a female. But let's say that was a situation we could have, and I was a female in this scenario. But the problem that I often found with leaders, like, I'm hanging out with my guys and we're talking and stuff, but I'm not seeing growth. And what I found was that people said, well, disciple, but they didn't understand what and how. And a lot of people, especially those of you who are A-type leaders, need clear handles on, okay, what do I do? Like, tell me what I do. So what I did is I created this thing where we created 4 different stages of discipleship. 4 different stages of discipleship is like 4 moments I think nearly everyone experiences as following Christ. The first one, now I'm going to walk through these and I'll send Millie or someone this slide. But the first step of discipleship is someone who says, I'm at the gather stage. And this is someone who goes, I'm just still trying to work out who God is, right? We all know people like that. People who are not against faith, but they're not really for faith. They're not Christians. They're like, I don't really know what I think. That's when the discipleship journey begins. Jesus didn't say go out and find people who believe in me and disciple them. He said go out and make disciples. So discipleship begins before someone's made a commitment to Jesus. And this is someone who's just in that gathering stage of faith. Then the next step is someone who's in the glue stage. And this is someone who's either, and I want to be clear here, who's made a commitment to Christian community or a commitment to Jesus. Now, why do I say that? I think you can be an atheist and be a part of a church. But that means that you've moved from being wishy-washy over here to actually going, I'm in Christian community and I love these people, but I just don't believe in Jesus yet. But there's a step further that you've taken. Or this might be someone who's connected with Jesus, who's actually given their life to Christ, okay? And the glue stage is this understanding, they're gluing to either community or to Jesus. The next stage in discipleship, I think, is the grow stage. And this grow stage is really helpful because what it is, it's saying when someone starts to ask self-feeding questions, how do I take a next step in my relationship with Jesus? Does that make sense? How do I take a next step in my relationship with Jesus? And finally, I think the last kind of developmental stage in our spiritual formation is this. How do I lead? I want to go and lead other people to Jesus. Now, in my experience, I will send it to you. I know you people were wanting that. I'll send it. People are like, oh, great. So what happens is that we get someone in the gather stage and then we just churn them through. This is not a production line. This is not a thing where I'm just like, cool, here's Victoria. She's at gather. Now she's at glue. Now she's at grow. Now she's at go. Victoria, go save the world. Like, that's not how it works. I don't know about you, but I started gather, then I went to glue, then grow, then kind of back to glue, then gather, and then it kind of got messy at times. And this is not a linear process. It's a moment where we can create handles for going, okay, where's Victoria at? I think Victoria's at grow. Victoria's kind of saying, hey, how do I take my next step? When I identify where she's at, I can go, cool, what is the next step I have for that stage? Now, if Victoria goes back to a gather stage, she's like, I don't know who God is. That's okay. I'm identifying the stage and then going, what's the next step for her? What's the next step for her? So we can actually identify where people are at with their journeys with Christ. And so you don't have someone who's not yet a Christian worship leading. And then you know that someone who's worship leading could probably their next step be discipling. Does that make sense? The whole thing is discipleship. And then what we actually started to do is this started to inform our whole process. Oh, let me tell you this story. Well, I started this process about 4 years ago. And it was really cool because we saw it play out. This is a guy named James. I really believe in discipleship so much that my wife and I decided to ask James, who was about 19 at the time, to come live with us for about a year and a half. And just because we didn't need money or whatever, he really didn't pay that much money. But I wanted him to learn how to be a man, and I wanted him to grow in his faith. And so I was like, move out of home, come live with me. I'm going to disciple you intensely. And so for the next year and a half, we just poured into him. We loved him. We yelled at him. We laughed with him. We cried with him. We told him to clean his room. I taught him how to do budgeting and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, dude, like we spoke about God all the time and how he was going. Now, we didn't do that perfectly. It sounds better than it is. It sounds easier than it is. I'm not suggesting everyone should go out and have someone live with them. That's definitely a special anointing that my wife and I are not in at the moment. We're happy for that. And then what happened is I started saying, James, who are you discipling? And there was this young kid named Daniel Seapon, and he'd been fairly hurt by the church, and so he wasn't really coming. So James just started texting him, being like, hey, dude, let's catch up for coffee. Remember, you don't have to invite someone to church. You just invite them into a relationship. And so he started catching up with Daniel for coffee and started giving him value again, started talking about Christ again. And slowly, Daniel started to come back to youth, and then he finally gave his life to God. And so we start to see this starting to work. And then what James would challenged Daniel to. He said, Daniel, who are you discipling? So the next summer for summer camp, Daniel remembered his mate, Donnie, who used to come to youth when he was a kid but was an atheist. He's like, Donnie, come around for a stay over at my house. And all summer long stayed at his house and close to summer camp. He's like, dude, why don't you come to summer camp with me? Anyway, 6 months after summer camp, we end up baptizing Donnie. And why am I saying this? It's because this is actually disciples making disciples. When we actually teach people to make disciples, the win is that they make disciples. It's not just about keeping people in church. That's not what we're doing. We're actually about sending people out in the world to find people who need to be found by Jesus Christ and need to be introduced to his love. This is the win of what discipleship looks like. There is someone in your life right now who's waiting for you to come along and say, hey, come into my world. It might just be an hour a week. At this stage, it could be an hour a month. And just say, come live in my world for that hour. Let's hang out together. 6 months' time, it might be, hey, who are you doing this with? Next step. And then what you'll see is the art of multiplication. Did you know that if we all just do one person, a different person for the next year, for the next 10 years, so each year you choose a new person and you just taught them to disciple one person the year after that. By the year 2030, all of Australia would be saved. That's how it works. See, the problem with the modern church isn't that we're irrelevant. It's that we're being disobedient. Christ said, go and make disciples. So that's the plan. That's what we should do. And you know what? Everything we did started to be seen through this lens. I'm going to give you guys this. We've got it here on a sheet. Everything we did was through the process of discipleship. So when we did our environments, when we were thinking about, okay, how do we set up our church? We asked the questions of gathering. Who would want to come here? Like, would people want to gather here? We asked the questions of glue. Would people connect in community here? We would ask the questions of grow. Are there opportunities for people to serve and have conversations about next steps in their faith? Would ask the question of go. Would this be a place that kids would feel welcome to actually start leading other young people as well? When we run our services, this is how we think about our services. We don't just start talking about, the Bible straight away. We gather their minds. So the worship leader hops up and says some kind of introductory statement to gather their minds together. Then in worship, we're gluing them in community through the faithful declaration of faith. Do you understand how we start to, everything that we did start to be seen through discipleship? Every time we run a camp, we have a gather goal, a glue goal, a grow goal, a go goal. When I teach people how to preach, I say, hey, gather their minds, glue them to the subject, grow them with practical next steps, and then give them some kind of going back out into the world. It became everything we formed our ministries around. Then what I would do is I would give a leader, I'm actually going to give this to you guys today. We're going to do some workshops. I'd give a leader one of these, and they would actually start to write down names of people in their life they wanted to disciple. They would say, had they had a conversation with them, what stage of the Forge process were they at, then the next steps that they wanted to encourage them on, and it would kind of just grow out from there. And so we started to actually document this process, and every term, leaders would sit down and be like, yeah, this kid's grown, I can change these things, or this kid's not, he's taking some steps back. But we became, to the point, methodical of saying, hey, we're going to disciple well. When people put together life groups, because I hear you guys, some of you are heading to a life group space and leading life groups soon. I would say to leaders, why would run them through the discipleship process in your life group? Like when you run a small group, here's my thing, is that rarely does anyone ever go, I can't wait to read the Bible. the first thing we do. That's okay for those who are spiritually, thriving. But I always say to a leader, why would someone come to your small group? And the greatest thing is have a gather thing. Like, hey, for the first 5 minutes, we all eat brownies and we just talk about our weeks. I'm like, man, I would come to that small group. So you gather them in. You just run them through this process in life groups. Then you glue them together. So my life group, after we've eaten brownies or whatever we're doing that night, we do highs and lows. We establish trust. We glue in community. Hey, what was the best thing that happened to you this week? What was the hardest thing for you? And they just all walk around. That comes with our prayer points. And then we grow. We open up the word together. We discuss the sermon. And we take next steps. I prep some practical next steps for them in that. And then go. We talk about how we can be praying for each other this week and how we can live out what we've discussed. And even then, you've just got a practical framework for how to run a life group, right? How our minds work and function. And I just think this stuff is so important that if we could harness it, it would transform a generation. If we could actually go, okay, how am I practically living out discipleship? This is what we're going to do now in our workshop. In a second, I think Millie's going to come and form you into groups. I'm going to explain this in 2 different steps. First of all, I'm going to give you this, so you can see it, all the different questions questions I ask. You might look at these and go, I hate this, I'm not going to use it. That's okay, just don't tell me to my face. Say it behind my back somewhere else where I can't hear you. But on the back here, I actually want to ask you all to use this process to plan a life group in your groups together right now. Plan, okay, how would you work? What I'd suggest is choose a topic and just plan out a life group. I don't know, how long do you have for life groups when you run them? Do you run life groups or small groups? What do you call them? Life group. Wow, guys, don't all say it at once. So good. That was really loud. And so life groups are small groups, so you go life groups, and just plan one out. Why don't you just spend 10 minutes with each other? I think if every life group leader spent half an hour planning out that time that they get to share with their life group, your life groups would profoundly shift. They just will. Half an hour. I know you're university students, you got social lives, you play basketball, whatever. I think you've all got half an hour a week to plan a life group. I guarantee you, if you did that, your life group culture would shift and kids would rock up and be like, young adults would rock up and be like, I can't wait for life group next week. My wife runs a life group on Monday nights. It's pretty famous because the first half an hour is, it's always dessert. And so they know that they're going to get dessert and they all get to talk around, their weeks and that kind of thing. And then they go together and they soap or reap the Bible together. They just sit down and they read the scriptures together. But they make sure that everyone kind of comes together first and loves each other in that space. The first thing they do isn't open the book of Leviticus. The first thing they do is love. I think that's really powerful. And then, just depending on time, how you go with that, the next thing I'm going to get you to do is, what would be the next steps for you guys? So, if someone's in the gather stage, what's the next step for someone in that stage? For me, I would send them to Alpha. I don't know if you have an Alpha program here. Or I'd have a one-on-one meeting with them. What's the next steps for someone in Glue, Grow, Go? And then if you actually really want to, you do a turbo leader in the room, you're like, oh, I can't wait to disciple. My goodness, this is so much fun. Haven't been a teacher's pet since high school. What you want to do is, I'll give you this. You can actually fill this out. And here's my suggestion. You just stick it on your wall at home. And every day you wake up, and there's your list of maybe one person you're discipling. I'm praying for that person today. I'm sending this person a text today. I guarantee you, friends, if you can take a hold of this, if you haven't already, I don't know, Taiwanese church might be killing it. And that's awesome. Please come teach us. But this will shift. This will shift a generation. This will shift your leadership. So, Millie, I don't know how you wanted to do this. Great. And then you're going to form into groups. And what time do they have in their groups? Is it till 12:15 or 12:30? I'll wander around the groups. So at the end of the group time, you can head out and eat food. Who loves food? Cool. So good. Yeah.
your time now. Let me just work with these people. And I just love it. I love them being a part of my family. I love them being part of my life. I love working side by side with them and seeing what God's doing through them.